Hey, welcome to episode 6 of Bums in the Bleachers, brought to you by the Chicago Sports Bums. I am Drammy Sosa, and I am alongside Praz Master. What's going on, Mike?
Hey, I'm doing well, John. Nice weekend. Not as crazy weather as we had last week here, and got a chance to go out and hang out with some friends. Went to a couple games last week. Went to Planning on going to a couple games this week. A lot on our plates here in Chicago. Got obviously we'll get into Cubs' upcoming schedule and their craziness, but we got the Bears here too. We got, this was a pretty jam-packed weekend with a lot of people being out, and what could be last week before people go back to school, go back to work, and everything. So it's nice to see a lot of people out and about in Chicago this weekend.
Yeah, I know it. It's always like it signifies like pretty much the end of summer, right? Where you see the Cubs, hopefully making that run towards the playoffs. The Bears about to start. We know that right now it's hot as hell out, but that weather's going to break at some point in fall and Halloween and Christmas will be here before you know it. So
Exactly.
yeah, big week for the Cubs. Obviously, 7 straight games that they had to play in 6 days. Or no, I'm sorry. Is it
I think
six
it was
days?
8
It
because
was
they did
eight.
hit,
Yeah,
or no, it was 7-7, but they did
they
have the
had the
one
day
day
off.
off in between before the doubleheader.
Yeah, that's right. So a ton of games, and now that's obviously the series with the Reds is leading into a series of 14 games within 13 days. That's what it was. So there's a lot of games to play, and against a lot of you know potential playoff teams. We knew that last week. This
hmm
week were going to be pretty big weeks for the Cubs. So before we dive in, let's have a little bit of fun and do our overrated, underrated. But before we start, we're doing our overrated, underrated game show edition in honor of Bob Barker. So, R.I.P. Bob. Took that
R.I.P.
right
Bob
took that right hook from Happy
from Adam
Gilmore.
Sandler. Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, sad loss. He lived into his late 90s, which is crazy. Um,
I think I saw a lot of people on Twitter making the joke that like he got as close to $1 without going over because of the
oh
the
yeah,
thing with the wheel on the Price is Right.
yeah,
I thought that was cute, but
I saw that.
obviously, yeah, everyone who grew up around the same time that you and I did, that was what we'd watch on our sick days between that and Maury and Jerry Springer. So fixture of our childhood kind of lost, and also like my grandma when he was hosting, she was like a religious watcher of The Price is Right as well. So R.I.P. to a legend. Cheers to you, Bob.
Absolutely. And definitely subscribe to Bums in the Bleachers. But let's jump right in. So we'll do our overrated, underrated game show edition. So I'll start off. I'll do my overrated here. I'm
Okay.
gonna go right for the jugular right away. I'm going Wheel of Fortune, most overrated game show.
I think I'm with you that it is an overrated game show too. It's really random, and you're never you're never really guaranteed to be like it's such a total game of chance of like guessing letters and spinning it to the right money amount and everything. Also, one other thing on Wheel of Fortune, their music back in the day used to be so much better than whatever the hell it is now. The dun, 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 dun. Bring that back. Like what the hell?
Yeah, I'm not a fan. I feel like I think it's a boring game show. I just don't see, like you said, it's a game of chance. It's Hangman. It's basically Hangman
Basically,
playing, right? So yeah,
yeah.
so that's my overrated. What's yours?
To me, my overrated, it's become a really like like this also involves a host that has since passed on that was very iconic, and it became a really popular one as he was kind of approaching his last days and he was still hosting. R.I.P. to Alex Trebek, but I'm going with Jeopardy, just because it seems like the questions on that show were like you have to have like a mental level IQ to get any of the questions on there, and I don't know. I like I don't think that like you're if you like that show, it's a good show and everything, but it's just one that like not the everyday person would be able to like really follow along that well if you don't know the topics too well.
Yeah, I get that.
Yeah.
All right, so underrated. I'm gonna go with whose line is it anyway? I
Ooh,
That
okay.
was an immensely underrated show, and I feel like it got more traction after it was off the air than while it was on the air.
For
Um,
sure.
I mean, you just got to see Wayne Brady before he made his infamous, what do you call it when he jumped on the Chappelle show? So that was
Yeah, yeah.
good old clean Wayne Brady.
Right, exactly. Hey, sometimes he would take a shirt off though on that show.
That's true.
Yeah.
So
I
yeah, I'm gonna
always
go with
love
that.
the like the Irish drinking songs they would kind of bust into at the end of every show too. Yeah. That's a good one. Underrated for me was one that it only lasted a couple years, and it was on Comedy Central, but originated across the pond over in Britain. I don't know. Did you ever watch this show when it was on? It's called Distraction. It
No,
was it was hosted by this guy named Jimmy Carr, British guy,
okay,
um,
I don't know what that is.
and basically like the it was a wild scene because like you would it would be trivia, but like as the trivia went on, like in the first round, you would have to pin like clothespins to your face, or there would be sometimes they would have the first round of it be where in order to buzz in and answer a question, you would be like sitting in this little like toilet stall, and you have to actually urinate to buzz in and everything like that. There would be like wheelbarrow races with nudists, and then at the end there would be like a grand prize that you could possibly win, but there was also the chance that if you didn't answer the questions in time, that they would just take like a hammer to that prize, and you would be stuck going home with like a completely damaged, TV or Vespa or whatever. So it was hilarious to me as a 12, 13-year old around that time watching that show. Was
All
kind
right.
of like it kind of like was like just you know like as a Simpsons fan, like always kind of like got stuck watching like Seinfeld after maybe a little bit. Like that would also that you kind of have the same effect with like that and South Park back in the day, that like it would often be the show that followed after South Park. So yeah,
Okay.
that's what kind of led me to it.
All right. I'll have to check it out. I had no idea what it was, but favorite for me, man, this was tough because I think that there were like there's a couple. I mean, Price, you said it, Price is Right was very nostalgic for me. That was like
Definitely.
the when you're homesick from school, you were watching that in the morning. Um, Family Feud is another one that I thought was great, but culturally, I'm gonna say Sábado Gigante, which was um on every Saturday.
God.
And for anybody who had lived in a Hispanic household, this was on in the background pretty much every Saturday. And it went on for like 50 years. I mean, it was like the longest running like television show. And Don Francisco, who is the host, um, fun fact, not even Mexican. So
Oh really?
uh, no, he was not. He's let's see, I believe he's German, technically born in Argentina.
Oh wow.
So fun
Okay.
fact about Don Francisco, who hosted Big Saturday, Giant Saturday.
I have only ever really heard it like referenced like on there have been like Family Guy cutaways to it, but like other than maybe accidentally, flipping through the channels one time watching it, I've never like actually sat down and really known it. Like, what was the concept of the show? Do you know?
It was just a variety show. I mean, it had a ton of stuff. It was just like a giant, long, just shit show. Like, I mean, this show had like too much
Okay,
on it that was just so hard to follow.
so
But
like a little similar to like Price is Right, kind of, or
I mean, there were like, there just games and stuff like that. And
okay,
it was a lot. I mean, it was just a lot going on. Again, it was like the longest running variety show that just, I mean, like, I think it ran, like I said, like 60 years. So, I mean, and again, it was mostly just background for me growing up. Like,
okay,
I don't even remember like any episodes, to be honest, or like any specific things that like happened. It was just something that was always like in the background.
gotcha. Okay,
So my
okay,
grandmother used to watch it a lot. So, yeah,
for
Elizabeth
sure.
White, it was all over the
It
place. All right.
Thank
So
you
it's
for checking in, Liz, family friend of mine.
what's your,
Um,
your favorite?
all right, my favorite. I mean, I know we kind of mean for the show for this segment of the show to not stick on sports, but I'm sticking with sports on this one. My favorite was one that I stumbled into when I was about 11 years old, and it would constantly be on ESPN Classic. Another host of a show that passed away too early to cancer, Chicago native Stuart Scott hosted it. I'm going with Stump the Schwab. It was like
Okay.
a dream of mine to get on that show when I was like a little 12-year-old, sports nerd that like would constantly get, the countdown in that first round. Like I would nail every single answer that would be listed on there. So yeah, that's one that I wish I was born earlier in life, that like I legitimately wish I could have been on.
Yeah, that I mean, any of those like game shows like with sports involved, like I mean, I love even doing like sports trivia, just like when you're at like in a Buffalo Wild Wings or some like shit bar like sports bar and they have trivia night going. So I can imagine that be something I'd be into too. But all right, so I'm gonna end it off with least favorite, and I'm just my least favorite game show or whatever you want to call it, Fear Factor. I just couldn't get
Ooh,
it.
okay.
Just and there's a couple reasons. One, I never thought and still don't think that Joe Rogan is funny at all. Like I just don't
Mm-mm.
think I don't think he's funny. His podcast is pretty interesting and I think he does pretty solid interviews and I'm not the biggest Joe Rogan fan for many reasons, but he,
Right.
at least puts on a good interview and gets people talking and he gets good guests, but I just don't think he's funny. So him as a host was just always so weird to me. Um, and plus, like, I don't want to watch people eating bugs and shit. Like, just
No.
putting like nasty things in their mouth and having to eat stuff. Like, it's not what I'm
Yeah.
there for. Like, it's like I wouldn't
No,
want.
not in a watching people
Yeah,
suffer like that.
no,
Definitely
it's
not.
awful, awful.
Yeah.
All right,
Um,
end this
and
end
and
this off.
and I mean, one other thing on that too is like there was kind of like a little reality show factor to it too that like kind of broke up the action of the show. That I don't know. It felt like if I was ever really interested in the content of it, it
Hmm.
would have got ruined a little bit by that. My least favorite, it's one that was popular for a while, but they took away one of the main features of the show and it went downhill real bad. I'm going Deal or No Deal. They took away the case girls. They
Yeah,
took away the models on the cases. That's how Meghan Markle got famous, right? Or no, not Meghan Markle. Chrissy Teigen got famous, right? Wasn't she originally one of those?
I believe. Yeah, I believe you're right. I don't
Yeah,
remember, but
but I mean, and the entire concept of the show too is like similarly to Wheel of Fortune. You're
yeah,
just
it's all
picking
chance.
cases. There's no real skill to it. You're just picking a
Yeah,
case, and you might get screwed. You might pull that $1 million case way too early, and you're left going home with like $500 maybe. Which is that really worth it to you?
yeah, it's like I feel like if you're like Rain Man, like, and you're straight up going into it like knowing statistics and like playing the math portion, you probably would be pretty decent at it, and you probably would win good money. But I mean, the average person, like, you're gonna want to take that chance. You're like you're down to two cases, and you're like $1 million or $1,000. Like, I want to play for the million. So
Yeah,
I mean, it's pure chance. But
exactly.
well, let's obviously talk some cup stuff because we got a lot of stuff to cover obviously from this past
For
week.
sure.
And first I want to start off just talking about Cody Bellinger. I know we talk about him almost weekly on this show, and we've obviously been singing his praises over the last few weeks, and he just continues to not let up. He continues to hit the ball. He's spraying it all over the field, hitting for power, hitting for contact. He's becoming this RBI machine at this point. But I really want to make the case that he should be a top contender for MVP. And I think right now he's probably somewhere in the top 10 because the field is so large, especially in the NL. We have
Hmm.
Ronald Acuna, you've got Freddie Freeman, you've got Mookie Betts, you've got Matt Olson, all these guys hit 30 plus, 40 plus home runs, hitting for power. But we talked about it in the pre-show. When you think of MVP, I'm thinking most valuable player. So yes, stats are important. You have to have the stats. And I think that Cody does have stats to back it up. And part of that is he did miss an entire month of the season, which quite honestly almost makes his numbers even more impressive considering like he's missed an entire month and he's hit so well. But when I think of most valuable player, you can take Ronald Acuna off of the Braves and you still have Matt Olson and vice versa. You can
Hmm.
take Mookie Betts off of the Dodgers, and before Mookie Betts even joined the Dodgers, they were a powerhouse,
Yeah,
and you still have Freddie
definitely.
Freeman. So you've got two different guys on the same team, and I get it. Like wins are always going to help that case. But looking at Cody Bellinger, what he's done, he's almost single handedly carried this Cubs team. And I mean, you can even look over the last few games where he's had, go ahead RBIs or just getting us
Yeah.
off on the board right away. Um, but I'm looking at his MVP year. I mean, that MVP year that he had was outstanding. I mean, he hit 305. He was on base at 406, slug at 629, and OPS of 1.035. I mean, just unbelievable numbers. Hit 47 homers, 115 RBIs, 95 walks, and 108 Ks. His strikeout rate was down that year, which it's looking like it's trending that way again this year. This
Hmm.
season, he's hit for better average. He's hit for 321. His on base is a little bit lower than what it was. He hasn't
It's
thrown
weird
the
that he hasn't been like walked as much as you would think about for like a
yeah.
guy with his type of power. But yeah, that's
Well, I
yeah.
think
Sorry to cut you off there.
no. I mean, the thing is, no, it's a good point. I mean, he's his on base is only 366 this year, which is still really good. But I mean, it's only
Absolutely.
40 points higher than his batting average. Which I mean, in this case, like I mean, you go look at analytics and they're going to tell you a lot of different things. But when you watch Cody, he's getting on base because he's putting the ball in play. He's hitting it.
Right.
So it's like he's not necessarily not taking his walks. He's getting on base because he's hitting the ball. So I think
Exactly.
that's been really impressive, to watch him maybe sacrifice a little bit of that power to get on base more. But I mean, he's been doing pretty well at the power numbers too. I mean, he's slugging 553. His
Hmm.
OPS is still .919. He has 23 home runs, again, missing an entire month. He's been averaging almost 10 home runs a month at that rate. So he probably would have been closer to 30 at this point, if not over 30. He's already at 83 RBIs, 31 walks. Again, his walk rate is down, or his number of walks are down, but he's only struck out 71 times this year too. So I mean, he's right on track to finish, this year probably 20 strikeouts less than he did his MVP year. So you're
Hmm.
looking at WAR that year. He had 7.8 WAR, weighted runs created plus of 161. This year he's got a WAR of 4 and weighted runs created of 142. So I get it. He missed an entire month. The power numbers are not going to match Acuna. They're not going to match Matt Olson. They're not going to match Mookie Betts or Freddie Freeman. But I mean, the numbers are really solid across the board. I mean, you would look at this player by stats and say, I want that guy on my team. And what he's done to lift this Cubs team, I mean, that's my case.
For sure. That's. I mean, you make a great point with the. I think the real crux of it all is just the time that he missed. But at the same token, with the time that he missed during that same time was probably the worst stretch of the Cubs season. Like that entire stretch from when he hurt himself in Houston up until like right before he got back when there was that series against Cleveland where they took 2 out of 3 here when you know things were looking kind of bleak for the Cubs.
Yep.
That him returning for like right after the All-Star break, like put it kind of gave the rest of the lineup a little bit of a lift to have him there. And I mean, yeah, you can definitely make the case that you know his value to the Cubs is probably more valuable to it has more value than what Mookie Betts or Ronald Acuna offer to the Braves or the Dodgers.
Yeah.
I guess you know, the big factors that are going to prevent him from winning it though is Acuna is having like one of the most historic seasons of all time with 30 homers and 60 stolen bases. Like,
Yeah.
you know, it's hard to really beat that out. And the case you make for Bellinger not being on, uh, you know, not having him and the Cubs struggling during that time, you could make that same case possibly for Mookie Betts in that the fact that like after he left the Red Sox, look how much they've fallen back now.
Yeah.
So I mean, and there's also a factor too of, and this does kind of apply to Bellinger too, but with Mookie Betts, he doesn't steal as many bases as Ronald Acuna does, but he gives you the option of playing multiple positions. He can play
Yeah.
center, right, and second. He spent decent time with the Dodgers at all three of those positions this year.
Yep.
Obviously here in Chicago, Bellinger, he's played some center, he's played some first. He's probably been more valuable as a first baseman to the Cubs because that, for so long at the first half of the season, first base was such a dark, dark hole with Trey Mancini and Eric Hosmer playing there. And, they found a competent replacement to him in center field in Mike Tauchman. His value is probably greater just from a advanced statistic perspective in center field, but from the point of where the Cubs need him, first base has been the place where he's kind of added the most value to the team.
Yeah.
The other part of it though is the teams below the Cubs, there are some cases you could make for guys who fill that same void. I'm thinking specifically of Corbin Carroll with the Diamondbacks. That where would they be without him? And were the Diamondbacks really a team that people thought were going to be good going into this season too? I mean, as it stands right now, Cody Bellinger, I think we can both agree should get a little more consideration than he's going to get, but almost assuredly won't win it just because you have the monster seasons of Acuna and Mookie Betts. But it sucks because there are cases to be made that in a lot of years, Cody Bellinger would at least be a National League MVP finalist.
Yeah. No, totally get that. But
Mm-hmm.
well, let's keep it moving. I mean, we're talking about one guy who's been an MVP for the Cubs this year. Let's talk about another guy, Justin Steele. I mean, that was a huge win that he got in game 2 of the 3-game set against the Brewers. We obviously took 2 out of 3 from the Brewers, which was not looking great after game 1 and that 6-2 loss at home. We obviously saw Jameson Taillon just continue to shit the bed. And we talked about it the week before that, hey, it's time to put your big point pants on. It's time to earn that contract. It's time to go out there and shove. And right away just didn't deliver. And it was crazy.
One batter into the game.
It was the second pitch, wasn't it? I think it was the first or second pitch. It was, and we've talked about it too. It's there's certain guys that you should not let beat you, right? We talked about Pete Alonso when they were playing the Mets, and other guys along the way. Christian Yelich has been a Cub killer since he's joined Milwaukee. That's the guy you can't let beat you. And I know that.
And even going further back to that when he was with the Marlins too.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
So, and that was the guy that right away, Jameson Taillon let him beat him first batter in, so that was obviously disappointing. But, the next game, you were at that game.
Yes.
So that was a 1-run win with Justin Steele going 6 innings in that game of shutout baseball, bullpen taking over, and then again just a 1-0. So I mean, tell us about that game, because I know you were there, and obviously on TV you can see that it had this playoff atmosphere, but I know what it's like to be at Wrigley during the playoffs as well as you do. So talk to us about that a little bit.
I mean, so coupled with the fact that going into that series, they were 4 games back in Milwaukee. We all viewed this as the series they really need to win.
Yeah.
They really needed to take at least 2 or 3 from it. And then to start off as poorly as you did, Jameson Taillon lays an egg. Offense really doesn't do too much. I will give Jameson Taillon one little bit of credit for the performance he had, and that is that he did at least go out and give you 6 innings. And he didn't look particularly good in those 6 innings, gave up 4 earned runs, and I think another 1 unearned. But he did kind of save the bullpen a little bit, which I think you could say did help factor into the wins the next 2 days, because, the fact that the next night, the Cubs take the lead 1-0 in the first inning on an RBI groundout. That's the only run of the game. But Justin Steele, early in that game, does get himself into a little bit of trouble. He doesn't let Christian Yelich beat him first at bat of the game, but I believe he did walk him. He let Yelich on a couple times in that. Well, maybe it wasn't him specifically, but they let Yelich on a couple times in that game. He threw about 30 pitches in the first inning. Just to get through 6 innings, he had to throw 111, which is, I'm certain, is a career high for him at that point. We saw like that was Justin Steele's like finest hour as a Cub to that point. The crowd was super into it. I was in the left field bleachers along with Alexis Lopez, friend of the Bums. It was her first game at Wrigley since like she was 8 years old in 2003. Not a Cubs fan for what it's worth, but I digress. Like it was wild to be at that game and have the crowd kind of excited, but also like very much on pins and needles with like every single pitch. Late in that game, you had Christian Yelich get on, and I think just about everyone in the ballpark knew that he would be running in a spot like that where he represents a tying run. And him, he takes off. Jan Gomes and Dansby Swanson combine to throw him out and get out of a huge, what could have been a huge jam at that point. Adbert Alzolay comes in, makes the save. You had a couple nice plays from Ian Happ out in the field, too. There was some scary-looking balls that were hit. I believe it was Willie Adames in, like, the 5th or 6th inning, hit one that I didn't even see from where I was sitting because I was in the part of the bleachers where, like, it kind of jets out before that curve in the wall.
Yeah,
and it got hit into the corner. I thought it was in the basket. And then not everyone was cheering at first because, like, we couldn't exactly see him either. But see him with the ball and like it was more like a sigh of relief at that point than like cheers at that point.
Yeah, a lot of nervous energy, I bet. But I mean, just overall, I mean, and you called it too. I wasn't feeling super great going into that series too. And in the last episode, I thought they were going to lose 2 out of 3. It was and it wasn't necessarily like all on the Cubs. It was a lot to do with Milwaukee's pitching rotation, and their staff. I mean, their rotation has been so solid over the last few weeks, and they've really like caught fire, and they've really just been riding their starters. But we got to see a little bit of vintage Hendricks turning back the clock in that series in Game 3, which I get nervous sometimes with Kyle this year. It's like he'll have like that. This year, and I think a couple of years before, over the last couple of years, like he starts off kind of rough in the first couple innings, where he's kind of been known to give that 1 or 2 runs to start off the game, and then he settles in. But knowing that Milwaukee's rotation, how good they've been, you almost can't afford to be down 2 runs in the first inning or second inning right off the bat, because you don't want to be playing behind against a pitching staff like that. And Kyle he held them down. And that was a really impressive win by the Cubs in that, and I believe that was the blown save game too, where they came back and they won it in the late innings. So, but it was really nice to see Hendricks, and you called it too. You said Kyle, you were confident Kyle at home, at Wrigley.
It's what he does. He shoves at Wrigley.
He does,
especially in games as big as that one was.
Yeah, that was impressive. So, I mean, getting that win was huge. Getting the series win was huge. Obviously, we talked about needing that sweep to really kind of gain any kind of consistent ground on the Brewers. And all they were able to do was gain 1 game, and you would hope that others around you would help, but they really haven't for whatever reason.
Thanks a lot, Rangers. Thanks a lot, Phillies.
Yeah. Apparently the Cubs are the only team that can beat the Brewers right now. So that's been frustrating, but it was great to see Kyle. Then obviously we go to Cincinnati, and we have a 4-game set there. Feeling like, honestly, I thought they were going to take 3 out of 4 in that series. I said it last week in the predictions. So
that was one that, like, there were a lot of things going up in the air with that one because, like, you had Jordan Wicks making his 2nd career start ever in Game 1 of that doubleheader. Then you go to an opener, Game 2 of that doubleheader, where you get really good pitching from the makeshift effort that you get from
Yep.
Hayden Wesneski and Drew Smiley and Jose Quas and everything, all
Yep.
up until the ninth. Edward Elsley has his first rough outing in quite some time, and that'll happen from time to time with a young pitcher.
He was being used a lot too. I mean, he was used a
He
couple games
really
in
has been.
Milwaukee, and yeah, so I
He
wasn't
really has
too
been.
surprised.
So one note I wanted to point out: game one, the game one win of that series, Jordan Wicks, he became the first Cubs starter since 1997 with Jeremy Gonzalez to get wins in his first two career starts as a Cub, as a major leaguer. And when I say the name Jeremy Gonzalez, like, is there a specific moment you think of? Because there's one that I think of him not as a Cub a few years later. Uh, Anything come to mind with that?
No, honestly, I'm like,
So he was the pitcher on the mound in 2003 for the Rays when Sammy Sosa broke his bat and there was a half inch of cork
okay,
sticking out of it.
okay,
Yeah, yeah, but wild to think that like something like that could happen going back to Jeremy Gonzalez in '97 in a year where they start off 0-14, that a rookie pitcher comes up and gets wins in back-to-back starts for you. A little bit better this year going on with Jordan
yep.
Wicks. Goes 5 innings, only allows one run for the second consecutive timeout. Pretty damn impressive for the fact that, like, we saw what the Reds offense was capable of today, albeit against Jameson Taillon. But so far so damn good with Jordan Wicks.
Yeah.
Game two, you get the Johnny Holstaff game. You get a blown save by Adbert Alzolay, former Cub. Nick Martini takes him deep to tie it, and he gives up a game-winning single a few batters later. Um, you know, it'll happen, but it does. It is a little disheartening that, like, a game that had such a high impact, they were so close to winning it, and then it had to happen again the next night. Two games that have such a high impact because those two wins could have given you the season series and the tiebreaker over Cincinnati,
Yep.
and you come so close and then you just blow it.
Well, not only that, but I mean, there was a couple things that should have come from that series, right? I mean, they honestly should have swept because those two blown saves should have been wins. And again,
Yep.
you're right. It's baseball. It's going to happen. You're going to blow saves. You're going to lose games on walk-offs. That's the unfortunate part of baseball. It's a lot of chance, and that happens. So, but that's two games that you could have added more separation from Cincinnati. And we talked about it with the Giants and Diamondbacks playing very, medial, like 500 baseball right now. That's two
Mm,
games you could have added on both of them. That's two games you could have gotten closer to Philadelphia, which lost two games to the Brewers during that time stretch.
yep.
And you're looking at maybe potentially being about a half game out of the first wild card spot, which
Right.
obviously is going to give you that home field, advantage in that series. So, that obviously it stung. It stung to watch them lose those two games in the fashion that they did, back-to-back walk-off wins where you just felt it. You felt the wheels just coming off, whether it was Albert Alzolay, whether it was Mark Leiter Jr. These guys have been obviously taxed a little bit, and they were being used pretty heavily in that Milwaukee series, but they did have the day off. You would have hoped that they would have been fresh for this series. They weren't. And that's where, you know, it's in it. I don't want to put it all on the pen because they lost those two games by one run in games that the offense just didn't put up anything,
This is true.
and they were really rough, and I want to point this out here that nothing's come easy for the Cubs since the start of August. We've had 13 one-run games since August 1st. So
Hmm.
a lot of close games, not a lot of separation. The offense has been kind of stagnant, and we talked about it pregame, um, that the offense has scored 30 runs over the last 7 games. 15 of those runs came on Monday through Saturday games. So in the 6 games prior to today, they scored 15 runs, and they scored 15 runs today, which felt great. It felt like an offensive onslaught, and it was like finally they're breaking out of it. But I also want to point out that really they scored 18 runs through 6.5 games, because the last 4 innings is where they scored 12 of those 30 runs. And the eighth, they scored 7 runs. The ninth, they scored another 5. So
Right.
it wasn't like they have consistently been hitting well, like they had been kind of been doing all through June and July. It was a late, onslaught at the end of a series. And so that's still a little concerning to me. I'm hoping that this is what breaks the offense out of their slump, because you've been looking up and down the lineup, and outside of Cody Bellinger, there hasn't been a lot of consistency. Talkman has been slumping. Dansby Swanson's been slumping. Saya's been hitting really well.
So yeah,
We
it's been
can
Ian
talk
Happ
about
has
it.
come on real strong.
Well, we'll talk about it later. But Ian Happ is he's had a good week. After
Yes.
I've called him out, and David Ross for batting him third in the lineup. So, um, but yeah, I mean that's been concerning, in terms of the offense. And then again, the pen, right? We got to see two different versions of this bullpen over the last 7 games, where
Yeah.
the first 4 games of the 7 games they played, throw it up there, 13 innings, 3 runs, really well. But they've had
Yes.
3 blown saves in there. And I know I texted you over the weekend. This is my gripe. Jed Hoyer's done a really good job of making makeshift bullpens. He's done a good job of like bringing reclamation projects or guys that just didn't pan out, maybe change the scenery guys, guys that have like great spin rate, throws them in the pitch lab and is able to turn around. They've done a really good job of doing that. But the problem is they haven't gone out and gotten a high leverage guy. At the end of
Right.
the game, when you have, the bases loaded or 2 guys on, and you have 1 out and you just need straight strikeouts. You don't want the ball in play. You need somebody to go up there and throw gas. They don't have that. And they don't have that consistency. I mean, they have Merriweather who can hit 99, but we talked about it earlier. Palencia, Merriweather, great fastballs, but they're not necessarily fastballs that I feel are like intimidating to other teams. They look hittable. So, I mean, what are your thoughts
For sure.
on that portion? Like, do you think, there's nothing we can really do this year, but even
No.
just thinking next year, do you think that we need a high leverage guy, or do you think we can continue to manage the way that we have? Because the bullpen has been top 5 in baseball, but in those moments, I feel like it's a little bit more noticeable.
Well, I mean, you know, you take the outs any way you can, but yeah, like, you see so many other teams that have guys that come out of the pen just throwing, 95 and above that are striking out like, you know, striking out like 13, 14 guys per 9 inning. And it's like,
Right.
where the hell can we ever find one of those? So,
Right.
yeah, I mean, I think going into this season that they constructed a bullpen that was on par with the kind of team that I think they would have. I don't think they were really expecting the Cubs to take off like this and be a big penny, playoff contender coming down the stretch and everything like that. But you know, again, the thing that I keep stressing with is that, like, why was there no freaking left-handed options available to this, especially when you have to face, the guys that you're the most scared of in your own division are a lot of lefties. Ellie De La Cruz, who, yeah, he's cooled off, but he still has a lot of power. Matt
Yep.
McClain, Rowdy Tellez, list goes
Yelich.
on and on. Yelich, exactly. Um, you need a guy who, if that guy's coming up late in the game, that you can trust to get him out. And it's just like, you know, it feels like malpractice that, like, they didn't
Yeah.
go into this season with a guy that, like, you knew had a good chance of getting lefties out as a lefty reliever. Like, they had Brandon Hughes just on the injured list, had a solid year last year, and now he's landed back on the injured list again. Your de facto lefty guy has kind of become Mark Leiter, who's a righty in himself, but you didn't know that you had that going in this season.
Right.
You didn't know he would become this, like, heavy reverse split pitcher that, like, you rely on to get lefties out. Yeah, I mean, yes, they definitely need I would say the bigger need is to try to find more of those guys. But at the same token, yes, get a heavy strikeout guy that like seemingly every other contending team in baseball has. You know, you feel a hell of a lot better about your bullpen when you have one of those guys in there.
Yeah, yeah, and I was on like a public forum, like I was on Bleacher Report, and I made a point that was like, hey, this is, Jed's done a good job of building bullpens this way, and they've been efficient for the most part. But you do tend to see this kind of amplify a little bit more when you're in these kind of late inning games where it's a really close game. They create traffic because these are guys that the ball's gonna be put in play. They're supposed to
Right.
generate soft contact, but with that they're generating contact. So sometimes those balls are going to get through, and sometimes they're going to create traffic. And then they don't have the stuff to get out of the inning with strikeouts because they pitch contact. And you're putting even more pressure on your defense to kind of create some double plays. We saw it with the third game of the Cincinnati game where,
On the
Dansby
last play of the
Swanson
game, yep, Dansby tried to
almost,
turn.
yeah,
Yeah,
almost made that great double play. But it honestly shouldn't have gotten to that point, and I mean, it just,
right.
you don't have a strikeout guy to your point. So, I'm hoping that next year that Jed sees this. He goes out, he gets a power pitcher, he gets somebody, in the back end of the bullpen that, if Alzolai's your closer and you're going to continue to lean on him, then great. But you do need a power guy somewhere to pitch the seventh, eighth inning, and preferably a lefty. I mean, I don't know who that's going to be, but they definitely need to build better depth and better, I guess better splits in the bullpen where you've got some lefty specialists, some righty specialists. But yeah, I mean, it was disappointing because again, those are two games that they really should have won.
The one thing I will say about adding a high strikeout guy like that is that sometimes that does come with someone who also will walk a lot of guys because he's relying on his stuff out of the zone to get hitters to swing and miss. And we saw it ourselves with, Carlos Marmol in the early 2010s that like, you do your homework on a guy and see that he's not throwing a lot of stuff in the zone. You could rely on seeing four balls before you get three strikes. Obviously you really want to get a guy that can strike guys out, but you'll get into some trouble if it's a guy who walks a lot, which like when Blighter blew the save on Saturday night, that's mostly how he got into trouble. So
Yeah. Well, let's jump into your gripe because I saw you all over X, formerly known as Twitter, about this, and we've talked about it. So I'm going to let you just kind of take the lead here on, obviously we were super excited when Alexander Canario got called up to the bigs. Another top prospect for the Cubs,
for sure.
number 14 in their pipeline.
He came over in the KB trade, I believe, from
He
San
did. So
Francisco.
it was him and Caleb Killian who came over for Chris Bryant in 2021, I believe that trade was. So yeah. So I mean, what are your thoughts? Because I know we talked about it. I know this definitely kind of got under your skin a bit.
It's like I don't know, where do I begin with this? Like, why are you wasting a roster spot that like you're publicly going out and saying is like the last guy on your depth chart? Especially like I get it if you want to call someone up from Iowa who can be that guy, but why would you do it with a guy as talented as Alexander Canario? Why would you do it with a guy like Alexander Canario who does help you in a role you've been struggling with in hitting left-handed pitching? I know you have some data on what he's done in AAA as of recently, and he struggled a little bit, but
Yeah.
overall over the course of this year, he has hit lefties well. I mean, last night in the loss, Patrick Wisdom started at first, your favorite player, a guy who this season, even being a right-handed hitter, has an OPS 100 over 100 points higher against righties than he does lefties. And he's in there in the starting lineup against a left-handed pitcher just because he's a right-handed power bat that like I just David Ross just thinks that like by instinct he's going to hit a lefty well without even looking at the numbers or anything. I mean,
I'm going to tell you this. I'm going to tell you this real quick.
Sure.
Patrick Wisdom, and I know we talked about too, another one of the players on the team that honestly should not have a roster spot right now in Miles Mastroboni. These two guys have to have some kind of like dirt pictures of David Ross that are incriminating. I mean, maybe he's out like with some hookers or something, and they've got some dirt on it, because it makes no sense to me. Not only are they playing, not only is like Mastroboni taking up a roster spot that, potentially could go to PCA, or another
Right.
pitcher somewhere down the line, a Ben Brown, or trying to think of the other guy who's coming
Luke
up too.
Little. Uh,
Yeah, anyone at this point,
yeah.
right? So he's taking a roster spot. You have Patrick Wisdom, and not only is he being thrown up in the lineup, but he keeps getting thrown in at first base, where he is just so sub average as a first baseman. He's so hard to watch out there in first base. I fear every time he's out there playing first, where I'm just like, this
Mm-hmm.
guy may be worse than Trey Mancini, and that was rough to
Oh
watch.
God, yes.
So I don't get it why those two are still on this team. And I get Patrick Wisdom has power. He's got 20 home runs this year in limited action, but that's what he is, man. You can find other guys to do that. And one of them may be Alexander Canario, who's actually part of your future.
Yeah.
You hope at
Yeah.
least.
Exactly. I mean, I don't know where to go with this, but like the only guys on this roster who should be playing at first base defensively, like you said, Patrick Wisdom he's
He's
fine at third
awful.
base. He's fine.
Awful.
Yeah, but at first base, like, what are you doing? The only guys on this roster who should ever be playing first base now that like you cleaned house of Eric Hosmer and Trey Mancini, it should only ever be Jamer Candelario or Cody Bellinger. Like,
That's it.
just keep it to those
Period.
two. Yeah.
Period.
I mean, what again, like, this goes in even more like kind of roster mismanagement, but like, you have a much more effective player that can do the job as good or better than Wisdom does. Why are we wasting our time with Patrick Wisdom?
I'm done. I'm done
Yeah,
with him.
yeah, no, I agree, and like there are ways to work around it. You have Cody at first, or you have Jammer Candelario at first. You stick Nick Madrigal at third base. Probably not the ideal guy you want at third base, but we're stuck with him now, and he's been getting by with you. He had a big hit today. Um, you know, but like you call this guy up to be the help that you were expecting to have against a left-handed pitcher, and you're not using him
At all.
I just
not even
like
pinch hitting.
what is even the point of calling someone up like that? That like just sign some street free agent if that's the only value that you have for him, or like there are other guys in Iowa who like you could say deserve a cup of coffee too. Like David Bodie would be more deserving of having like the sit on the bench spot,
Yeah.
For the entire time, or
Sure,
like
give me the veterans minimum to sit on the
exactly.
bench. I'll take that.
Exactly. I'd love to be able to, just sit on the bench, wear a uniform, fly with the team and everything. Yeah.
Well, obviously, so they took 2 out of 3 from Milwaukee. They split with Cincinnati. They ended up going 4-3, which is what I predicted last week. You said you thought they'd go 5-2.
Did I?
Actually,
No. That was the week before when they played against the Tigers and the.
Okay.
Who did they play before that?
Well, I know you had them 2 out of 3 against Milwaukee.
2 or 3 against Milwaukee and splitting against basically what they did.
Okay, so you did. Okay, so basically what they did. So
I think you had them losing 2 or 3 to Milwaukee.
I did, and I had them winning 3 of 4 from Cincinnati. So, So I mean, it played out, I guess, your way, but so I guess the way that it's played out now, it feels like they wasted an opportunity to gain a couple games, in the wild card spot, the first wild card spot, like we talked about with those 2 blown losses. They lost about a half game in the division, after the Brewery series. So they didn't really, they lost traction. They didn't gain any. They're 3.5 back in the division, 2.5 back of Philly for the number 1 spot. And they have a 2.5 game lead on Arizona and San Francisco, pending their results. I didn't see final scores there.
I believe they both lost, so that would be up to 3 now.
So 3 games. So where's your focus? Do you think there's still the chance for the division? Do you think Milwaukee's just going to continue to play this way the rest of the year, and they need to focus on wild card? Or I guess it doesn't matter. You just have to keep winning series regardless. But
Right.
where's your, as a fan, where's your focus? Do you still think there's a chance for division, or is it wild card?
To me, today's game between the Cubs and the Reds, and then what the Brewers did against the Phillies. It was going to be so pivotal with how I went into this.
Okay.
I'm still holding out some hope for the division, just because of the fact that, like, since we last recorded, they did actually net over the course of the week, even as much of a roller coaster it has been, they did gain a half a game on the Brewers since then. Currently only 3.5 back. Technically, they're just as far back against the Phillies because the Phillies do own the wild card from beating us head to head. So they own that tiebreaker. The one thing I will say is that if they do happen to pass up the Phillies, and like I would hope that would be their something they would try to shoot for if they believe that the division is out of reach. There is no real difference between being the number 3 NL Central Division winner and being the number 4 top wild card spot, because at the end of the day, you're not going to catch one of Atlanta or the Dodgers. They're head and shoulders above the rest of the league. You're going to wind up playing in that wild card series regardless.
Yep.
The one thing I think does help is that, if you do go on to win the division, you're not playing Philly in the wild card round, which out of all the teams that they would likely play, that's the one I want to see the least.
Yeah.
I do actually have a friend who's a big Phillies fan who does similar Phillies podcasting that I talked with earlier today that may come on as a guest. Shout out Mark and Philly. If that happens to be the case for how the playoffs shake out. But I mean, as of right now, 3.5 back of the Brewers. You gained ground on the head-to-head with them. You tied with head-to-head with them this week when you won the series. And on top of it, that last series of the year, I have a feeling the Brewers will likely try to line it up where you get. It's hard to say. If it's really on the line, if it's like really close where that last series, really determines everything, you're probably going to see, Burns, Woodruff, Peralta in that series. But the
Yeah.
one thing that the Cubs have going for them is since the start of last season, the last 10 times they faced Corbin Burns and Brandon Woodruff, they've actually won. They've won 7 out of those 10 games. So, I mean, that'll be who you'll probably see because Milwaukee's going to pitch their best no matter what. But I feel like they could beat them if it comes down to that.
Guess we'll see. We've got 25 games to end the season, so hopefully, they continue to win series the way that they have. They've been, 12, 1, and 2 over the last 15 years, something like that.
They are 10, 2, and 3 because the split today, it was 10, 2, and 2 previously, so 10, 2, and 3.
Okay. So,
yeah,
I mean, they keep winning series, and that's what you got to do. Just keep winning series and let it play out and see what happens. But
yeah.
All right, let's jump into our start and DFA portion of our show. So the first one that I'm going to give you, these are 2 current players from this year. So I'm going to just jump right into it. Player 1 is batting .283 with a .359 on base, a .460 slug, and .818 OPS. Has 14 homers, 65 RBIs, weighted runs created plus of 122, a Baseball Reference WAR of 4.3.
Okay.
Player 2 is hitting .254, .348 on base, .442 slug, .790 OPS, 16 home runs, 55 RBIs, weighted runs created plus of 119, and a Baseball Reference WAR of 2.1.
Okay. I feel like I might know who player 2 is. Player 1 definitely has the better stats across the board. I mean, if you're telling me that I'm DFAing Ian Happ over whatever player 1 is, player 1's stats are really, really good. So I think I got to go with player 1. They're just significantly better.
All right, so neither are Cub. So you're off the hook. I'm not making you DFA any Cubs this week. So, so this player 1 is William Contreras, the catcher for the Milwaukee Brewers.
Ah.
Player 2 is
Is that his
Wilson
brother?
Contreras from the St. Louis
Aha.
Cardinals. So William having a bigger year than Big Bro Wilson, which
Yeah.
really kind of shocked me, which really surprised me. I noticed it, during the season that William had played pretty well. I mean, he looks good out there, behind the plate. Not a bad base runner either. I think he's not really like a super fast guy, but I think he's a smart base runner. But he's really hit the ball well, and I mean, he also came
He
up clutch in
has.
some situations. So I was really surprised to see his numbers. Obviously play with Atlanta. They, jettisoned him off to Milwaukee to create room for
Sean Murphy.
Sean Murphy. Correct.
Yep.
And he's had a really nice year. I mean, he's had a really good year as a catcher.
Yeah. No, he definitely has. He's often one of those guys you forget about because like he's not the more famous of his brother. Between him
Yeah.
and his brother, he's not. Going into this year, I think everyone more expected the Cardinals to be the better team than the Brewers, and like
Yep.
even with the Cardinals being bad, they sometimes have a little bit more spotlight than the Brewers would. But yeah, that's definitely one that like you see him coming up to hit, like that's one you get kind of worried about if there are guys on base for the Brewers. So
Yep.
okay, I'm happy with my choice there.
All right. So next one, we're going pitching. So you inspired me with last week's episode with pitching, so I'm going to follow suit. These are over what would be 162 game series average. So player one is averaging a 16-10 record, 229 innings pitched per year, a 3.16 ERA, 154 strikeouts, 46 walks, has a FIP of 326, but only striking out 6.1 over 9.
Okay.
So player two is averaging 13-10 per season, averaging about 200 innings per season. ERA a little bit higher at 3.47, has more strikeouts at 161 Ks, 44 walks, a FIP of 381, so not super far from actual ERA, but has a higher strikeout rate at 7.3 Ks per 9. Again, pitches a little bit less innings, and a little bit more strikeouts, so has a little bit more Ks per 9.
Gotcha. Let me see first player again. So we got a 316 ERA, 326 FIP, but only 6.1 Ks per 9. Has a strikeout to walk ratio of over 3-1, so pretty good there. Let me see player two again. So almost 4-1 strikeout to walk ratio with this person.
Yeah.
Fewer innings. I mean, neither one are going to blow you away with, you not really overpowering in the strikeouts. So, player one had the lower ERA, gives you more innings per season. I know win-loss record isn't always the greatest indicator of how good a pitcher is, but has had a slightly better record. So I'll go ahead with player one on this one. I'll start player one, DFA player two.
Okay, so player two, you are designating for assignment Kyle Hendricks.
Oh no! One of my favorite Cub pitchers ever. No.
But
Oh God.
you are starting player one, which is Hall of Famer Greg Maddux.
Okay. All right. So we have Greg Maddux and the poor man's version of Greg Maddux. Okay.
Yeah.
Yes. All right.
Yeah. And honestly, not too far, surprisingly not too far behind. Now, granted, this is like, Kyle Hendricks has pitched what, I think 10 years or is it 10?
Well, 10, but you got to factor in that 2020 was
Injuries.
only 60 games. He's missed
Yep.
some time with injury. I probably, if you add it up, he's probably pitched about 8 or 9 seasons worth if it's
And
a full
Maddox played
season.
like 20 years, so
Exactly, and is like in the conversation for greatest pitcher of all time. So yeah, I'm happy with that.
Yeah. Still great, both great Cubs. So I mean, you'll take it.
Absolutely.
But all right, well let's wrap it up here. We've got our flying the W's and taking the L's. I'm just gonna do my W real quick because it's very simple. I'm gonna
Okay.
go with my W, Scott Boras, because with each passing week, each passing month, he is just building more and more case and more money for Cody Bellinger, which is going to make it harder for the Cubs to sign him long term if that's their goal. But it is going to continue to make Scott Boras the richest agent in all of baseball. So
You just
I
love
mean,
handing out W's to these villains, don't you? You're
I
handing
hate
them
them.
out to Scott Boras, to Justin Fields haters, to just everyone who like makes life harder for us. But
No,
hey,
the haters got an L. Oh no,
oh right,
no.
right,
You're right. You're right. No, you're right. I gave them a W because they got what they wanted. So you're right. I gave them a W. So you're right.
yes, yeah, exactly. But hey, look, hate Scott Boras all you want. He does an outstanding job of getting his clients
He'd
paid.
he'd be my agent. I hate his guts, but
Absolutely,
if I were in the big leagues, he would be my agent, 100%.
for sure. I only have one of each. My W, and this is more of just a thank you than a W, but friend of the Bums, White Sox podcast from the 108 on Thursday night. They recorded their show. We actually got some outside recognition for once. My Sox Summer, one of the hosts of that show. There was a little bit of conversation about one of the other hosts, Beefloaf, attending the Wednesday Cubs game. And, they were doing a little bit of ribbing on, oh, you're going to a lot of Cubs games. Are you going to convert and flip sides? And is this going to become a Cubs podcast now? And then My Sox Summer casually coming in. I think I know a good name for a Cubs podcast. It's Bums in the Bleachers. So shout out My Sox Summer of from the 108.
Love it.
Dear friend of the Bums, even if he is rooting for the other team in town, we really appreciate the publicity you're giving us.
Absolutely. Definitely appreciate it.
Yeah.
All right. So I'm going to give my first L. I'll let you give your L's and then I'll wrap it up because I think we'll want to talk about this. But my my first L is going to go to me. So
Okay.
I'm gonna give myself the L for complaining about Ian Happ batting third in last week's episode, and also specifically David Ross for not moving Ian Happ out of the third spot. Since my outrage and since my complaint, Ian Happ has done very well. He's hit 384, 500 on base, 692 slug with a 1.192 OPS, two doubles, two homers, eight ribbies, three walks, and only six strikeouts out of 26 at bats. So,
I think you'll
uh,
take those numbers from your number three hitter.
listen, I'm gonna tell you right now the same thing I told you before the show. I'm gonna hope that I L myself again next week. Dansby Swanson,
Yep.
pick it up, bro. Pick it up, Dansby. We need you.
Yes,
You've been hitting like
please.
shit. David Ross moved Dansby Swanson down to seventh or eighth in the lineup.
Mm.
let's let's see.
He had two pretty big hits today, though, when they batted around the
I'm,
eighth. But
hey,
yes, like
I'm only saying it so he goes off and I take another L
for
next
sure, for sure. Yes, let's speak that into existence with you motherfucking him. Um, all right, my L is all. We're also going personal here. My L is going to be me as well. Um, it's so earlier today on Twitter, with a couple people, we were just kind of jokingly, as Jameson Tyon was struggling to get through that game, just having a little bit of conversation about like naming former Cubs players that like what's Paul Kilgus or what's Ryan O'Malley, where are they at? Can they come back and pitch for us? Like really need this so like we don't have to watch Jameson Tyon pitch anymore. One person I follow wound up tagging former Cubs left-handed pitcher Glendon Rush in a tweet and asking him like, "Hey, are you available?" And with the Cubs playing the Reds, it kind of brought back a memory for me of a time in 2006 when he started back-to-back games against the Reds, and in both games he was matched up against former Reds pitcher Bronson Arroyo. Bronson Arroyo wound up taking Glendon Rush deep in both of those games as a pitcher. So in response to this gentleman I responded to on Twitter, I said, I would love to see Glendon Rush back on the mound. Just make sure that Bronson Arroyo isn't starting on the other side. Glendon Rush winds up responding back to me with, and I quote, "Be nice, Mike, or you will receive an 88-mile-an-hour four-seamer in the ribs." So that put me in my place. Thank you very much, Glendon Rush. Loved you as a Cub.
I love that. The last that so Glendon Rush always reminds me of one of like Lou Pinella's like famous outbursts when he joined the Cubs, and I don't even remember what like the complete outburst was about, but I remember it being about like throwing lefties out, on the mound, and Lou Pinella just like went
Throwing
off.
58-foot curveballs. Yeah.
That was the
Yep.
one. Yep, that was the one, and that was I believe Glendon Rush was pitching that he was talking about. So
I think you're right about that.
yeah, so shout out Glendon Rush, man. I love that guy, man. I say he was one of the lefties I loved along
Exactly.
with John Lieber.
Yep.
So yeah, shout out to Glendon. All right, what you had another L?
No. That's all I
That was
had.
it. All right, awesome.
Yeah.
So I'm gonna give my last L, and I think so shout out to My Sock Summer and the guys at the 108, and all those podcasters that have been giving us a little bit of shine here. So I'm gonna pay it back. I'm gonna pay it forward here, and I'm gonna L uh, Sox fans
Oh
and
no.
and
Oh no.
us.
Should I duck for
But
cover?
listen, but listen, I'm only L'ing Sox fans because I actually just feel absolutely sorry. Jerry Reinsdorf is the worst owner in sports. I cannot believe that this guy stood in a podium, he handpicked, not only did he handpick reporters and journalists that he was going to answer questions to, but then he went on to say, I'm going to answer the ones I want and ignore the other ones that I really don't want to answer.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's not only did he handpick, but then he went out and made a comment like that. He also went up there and he would rather take a fine from MLB saying that he's not going to sign Shohei Ohtani than actually go out and try to sign a guy like Shohei Ohtani. He would rather pay the fine because that's technically tampering. You can't say, a player's name who is not a free agent and is already on another person, in another
Right.
team. You can't say their name. That's against the MLPA negotiations, right? That's part of the collective bargaining
Collective
agreement.
bargaining agreement. Yep.
You can't say that. So he would rather, and he knows that. Come on. He knows that he can't
He
say that shit. And
he's
he
probably one
still
of the people who helped put that rule in place.
100% went out
Yeah.
and did it. Went out and did it. Still said it. So he'd rather pay that fine than pay like a potential goat in baseball.
Mm-hmm.
He also said that I'm trying to think some of the other like outlandish things that he said that he signed Chris Getz, to be the GM. Didn't
Yeah.
even go through an interviewing process and he actually got it's part of the collective bargaining agreement that they need to interview and go through a process and make sure that, you go through diversity hires and things like that. And to his credit, Jerry's been pretty good at hiring diversity in their
True.
organization. He has.
Kenny Williams lived there a long time. Marco Patti there a long time.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, and all their managers, right? Ozzie Guillen, Grafal, like, I mean, you
Yep.
can go, the list
Jerry
goes on and on.
Manuel. Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You could go on and on. Ricky Renneria, you could go on and on, right? So he's
Right.
done a great job of hiring, but he went to Manfred and said, I want you to waive this for me because I already know who I'm going to hire without having to interview anybody. And it's the guy that was in this organization
Mm-hmm.
developing players after he went out and said that the problem was development, that they haven't
Mm-hmm.
developed players.
Classic
I
failing upwards.
Dude, I just cannot understand like why Sox fans continue to root for that team to this point. And like I get like your fandom and like you're born into it and your passion and things like that. But at this point, I mean, like, do you want if you're a Sox fan, do you want them to move and just leave and just like give up on baseball entirely? Are you hoping that he croaks and that the team gets sold and then or because if he croaks, it's probably going to Michael. It's probably going to his son.
Possibly Michael's more in charge of the Bulls, but I
I
would
mean,
assume that's like who it would get left to.
I can't anymore. So not only am I giving them the L because I just feel sorry for the fan base and what they have to put up with, but I'm also giving it to the rest of us because most of us are Bulls fans. So
True.
considering that Jerry Reinsdorf has made it known that he cares more about the Sox than he does the Bulls winning, and then went up on a podium to tell you how little he really cares about the White Sox,
Mm-hmm.
gives you everything you need to know what he thinks of the Bulls. And that just I mean, we're stuck in mediocrity forever. Just forever.
I think I saw that someone jokingly said on Twitter that like Jerry Reinsdorf had a very exhaustive search to hire Chris Getz, and it was only exhaustive because he really just wanted to take his afternoon nap once he made the hire. So
Yeah, probably because he
yeah,
had to go down 3 flights of stairs to go meet with them.
yeah, yeah. That's tough on an old man.
Jesus Christ, man. So Sox fans, my sympathy actually goes out to you because
For sure.
I just cannot understand like that man, how he runs the organization or lack thereof. And I just generally I just feel bad. I've got friends and family who are Sox fans. I'm not a hateful, vengeful Cubs fan. I could give two shits if the Sox win or not, but I obviously
Six
want
times a
to.
year I am, but I think that applies for all of us.
Yeah, well now it's down to four, but even if so, it's
Right, four
it's
times.
most of my family, most of my friends are Sox fans. So I actually, like I told you in the beginning, podcast, my family is an outlier when it comes to baseball. So, but I feel bad. It's just, it's gotten to the point where it's not even laughable. Like you can't even just poke fun at them anymore and just like have that kind of jousting back and forth. Now it's real. Like this guy is truly a piece of shit. He's a terrible owner. And he basically told Sox fans he does not give two shits about them. So, yeah,
Nope.
that's my L. So my rant's over. Let's wrap up here. We've got our upcoming schedule predictions here: 3 against the Giants, 4 against Arizona. These games mean a lot because both teams are chasing the Cubs in the wild card standings right now. Can't lose ground to them. So,
True.
what are your predictions for the upcoming week?
You said three against San Francisco, 4 against Arizona,
Arizona.
correct?
Yep.
Well, so I looked at the matchups for the San Francisco series. San Francisco has yet to announce a starting pitcher beyond Monday. I know Logan Webb goes tomorrow for them. By the way, why am I wearing a Giants colored shirt right now? I really should have planned that out better. Um, another L for me there. Anyways, so yeah, the Giants they haven't announced any starters yet, but for the Cubs, you have probably the 3 most ideal starting pitchers you want to see go in this series. You got
Yep.
Justin Steele tomorrow, Kyle
Yep.
Hendricks on Tuesday, Jordan Wicks, or do I have that backwards? Is it Jordan
No,
Wicks on Tuesday and Kyle
it
Hendricks
might
on Wednesday?
it might be Wicks first, but I don't remember. But I know all 3 are going against San Francisco. So you're right there.
For sure. At this point in the season, those are the 3 guys. Yeah, maybe you could swap out Javier Assad at this point, but Kyle
He'll be
Hendricks
going
has
against
that.
Arizona.
That's true. Javier Assad will be going against Arizona. Um, you know, it's really up in the air with like what the pitching matchup is going to be with San Francisco not announcing anyone yet. But you know what? I like my chances in all 3. I say they're going to sweep the Giants, and then I think they're going
Wow.
to take.
Okay.
I think they're going to split with the Diamondbacks. So mark me down for 5-2 because at this point, I think that the Giants have just they kind of been like a smoke and mirrors team. Like who knows like who is hitting for them? Obviously they do have some really good pitching in Logan Webb. They pieced it together. They seemingly have a pretty good manager in Gabe Kapler, but it's just like you look at their roster and you wonder how they just keep getting it done. So
Yeah.
I'm going
Okay.
sweep of the Giants.
All right. So you've got 5-2. I'm going to keep on this train of just winning series, or splitting. So I'm going to go 4-3 again this week. I think they'll
Okay.
take 2 out of 3 from San Francisco because I like the way that their pitching staff is lined up for the series. So I agree. I think Steele, and I hate to be a Boog Sciambi here, but Justin Steele actually has a pretty bad record against the Giants career wise. So hopefully at home he can turn that around. So we'll see how that goes. But I think they win 2 out of 3 in that series and then split with Arizona. So I'm going to go 4-3. So we'll see how they do. But
I think you could pretty safely mark down 2 losses with Arizona because like their top 2 pitchers are about as good as anyone has between Zach
Zach
Gallen,
Gallen.
who like is one of the favorites for the Cy Young, and then
Yep.
Merrill Kelly too. Like I don't know how it's going to shake out with the pitching matchups, but thank you Tony for that tip. So it's going to be Steele tomorrow, Hendricks Tuesday, and
Yep.
then Jordan Wicks Wednesday. Thank you Tony.
Yep.
Yeah, as so I mean it's hard to really assume that you're going to take 3 out of 4 from them when they have as strong as pitching as they do.
Yeah. But if Hendricks is going Tuesday, then that means that Arizona will line up with Assad going game 1 and then turning the rotation
Correct.
back to
Well, you're probably going to
Tyon.
get you might get Ty on one of those
You get
games.
Tyon in
So
the second game, but then you have Steele and Hendricks ending up those game 3 and 4. So
I like secretly kind of hope that like Tyon lines up where he's facing against Zach Gallen, just so like that's like a guaranteed loss more than
and it's just
likely.
not, yeah, you don't want to
Yeah,
have, yeah, I got it.
yeah.
All right. Well, hopefully we have a winning record going into Monday. Not only that, hopefully we have a victory Bears Monday to talk about as well. You know, a little bit about the Bears. You know, we'll see how they do
De-
against the Packers. So
yes, big first game against the Packers, and I have an opportunity coming up with Decipio.com, Andy Dolan on the Pointless Exercise podcast, along with Mike Pusateri. I'm going to be jumping on with them every week. Talk Bears with them, preview basically the same we do here, preview the upcoming games, review the last games, go over some, things that some takes we see on X and takes that we hear on sports talk radio that we all like to make fun of. So should be a good time. Andy, he can be found on Twitter or X or whatever the hell you want to call it at this point, but all spelled out Decipio.com. And if you look up on iTunes or Spotify for Pointless Exercise Podcast, that's where you can find me for that.
awesome. Well, I'll be sure to tune in, and hopefully, again, we're celebrating a Bears victory Monday as well as a winning record for the Chicago Cubs. So, thank you for everybody who joined in, commented, followed us, liked, subscribed. Thank you, appreciate it, and we'll see you next week with episode 7. So,
See
have
you
a good night,
next week,
everyone.
folks. Go
Take it easy, man.
Cubs.
Go Cubs.